Hey guys, drdecks here. Welcome to our new job. We really appreciate you coming to our channel, so don't forget to click that subscribe button. Let me grab the plans. This is a permitted deck, and let's talk a little bit about the construction process of this build. All right, so basically, we are improving the lower main deck. We're gonna enlarge it. And right now it only comes out about 8 feet. But what we're gonna do is bring it out 10 feet to the edges, and then we're gonna peak at 16 feet in the center. So there's about a 6-foot carry past the edges here on a curve, okay? I don't remember what the actual radius is of this, but we're gonna be running a couple glue lambs underneath, and we're putting the footings in a V formation so that we can carry the load and not have such a large cantilever on our joists. To make this happen, we have to use 2x12 pressure treated joists, and the beams have to be a 5.5 by 10.5 inch glue lamb, not to span over 13 feet. So that means I cannot have over a 13-foot span from the center of this post, where this beam goes here, to here, okay? So the other 3 decks on this house look like this. So here's all the new construction that's going down. Everything else, these are existing decks, and we're gonna put new railing to match, and we're actually gonna put down some new decking as well. So we have to strip, and all these decks are tile right now, which has been very difficult. We've been here, this is our 4th day of demolition, and we've only torn off half of the decks on this side of the house. Now the upper deck on this side is cantilevered through the house with LVL joists. So they are 1 3/4 inches wide by 11 1/4 inches thick, and there's multiple plies laminated together. They are very strong and they span better than traditional joists, but they have to remain completely dry. No problem, all 4 of these decks we're gonna waterproof. We're doing a slight modification to this deck here. We're gonna leave the corner on this side as is, but the other side we're actually gonna build it out and make it square. And so we're gonna use a little bit of cantilever and some new product to lock that together and make sure that it works well for what we're doing. Everything's gonna be waterproof. Everything's gonna be soffited with clear cedar. This is a very nice project. We're gonna be here for several months. So I hope you guys enjoy the updates as we go. Okay, so we're doing Regal Ideas crystal rail on all 4 decks as well. Let's see if I can get you guys a side view. Okay, so here's a side view, and we're gonna have all the pods. We're gonna do this entire deck in TimberTech, AZEK, dark hickory. We're wrapping all the posts in dark hickory, all the beams in dark hickory, and then we're gonna powder coat all the pods in dark hickory color as well to match. So these 2 deck, or this deck on the upper is gonna match as well with fascia and details of the same, with the same powder coating. And the other 2 decks on this side of the house, which you can see over here, we haven't even touched them yet. But I'm hoping to catch a demo on those as we go, okay? So that's what we're up to. Like I said, it's 4th day of demolition today. We're just getting to the point where we're ready to pop the plywood on the lower deck, and then we can start dismantling the joists and the beams and these funky posts and these fiberglass columns. So I was thinking about repurposing the columns, but I don't know what I'd use them for, so I don't know if I'm going to or not. But mostly when we're in demolition mode, we just want to tear everything apart and get rid of it. We really aren't trying to salvage too much. Everything I do, I take to a recyclery as it is, and then it gets repurposed. So that usually works pretty well for us. That's the plan. And let's get over here. I think what I'm doing is we have our ditch witch here, our SK800, and we are using that to shuttle materials up to the street, because it's a long carry from the street down to the site and from the site back up to the street. So having a machine that can load into the truck, as long as we cut it down into manageable pieces, really makes things nice when we're trying to do our demolition. So, as well as bringing other things like tools up and down the hill and things like that. So smaller materials. So right now I'm just gonna get a load on the machine, and then I'll take that up and get rid of it at the truck. We've been going through a lot of blades, saw blades on this project. I found these Avanti Pro. They're like a lesser quality blade, similar to Diablo. They're made by the same company. Got them at Home Depot, like 2 for $7.99 or $6.99, something super cheap. They're like $4 a piece. So I'm gonna toss those, instead of using a $10 blade or a $15 blade that gets ruined, I'm gonna throw some $4 blades on our Metabo HPT saws. And I always am missing the key for the bolt. So I happen to have the right size nut driver right here on the end of my Martinez square. So I'm just gonna lock this in, and you know what they say, righty-loosey. On a rear handle saw, usually it's a reverse thread. So you just pop that off, pop your blade. I don't even worry about taking off the sticker because it's a demo blade, I don't care. A little extra friction ain't gonna hurt. And then lefty-tighty, and then you just drop your handy wrench right back on there, locked and loaded. All right, so our top deck is stripped and pretty much clean. It's about as far as we can go with it until we get the lower deck torn down and rebuilt, reframed. So the plan is today, get the rest of this deck down and loaded in the truck and gone. And then next week, we're going to dig and pour concrete footings for the deck, and then we'll start reframing the deck next week. The rest of today is just really getting this deck down. I don't care how we do it. We had to take a more gradual approach at tearing the upper deck down because we had to salvage all the joists. But this deck, we're taking the whole thing out. So it really doesn't matter how it comes down. So we're gonna take a little bit more aggressive approach on it because we can. And because, you know, speed is always a welcome trait when you can use it safely. So if there's any way that we can speed up this demo, we're gonna do it. I think instead of using our hydraulic jack to push all the plywood, we're just gonna cut in between the joists as much as we can, and then cut the joist and then just tear it down and get rid of it as fast as we can so that we can just dismantle this thing and maybe get out early on a Friday. Watching, I really appreciate it. One really important thing, don't forget about those cheap blades you can get at Home Depot because we're about to tear up a bunch, cutting up through some plywoods. Hey guys, Dr. Decks here. Just wanted to give you a build update on where we're at from the last time I saw you guys. I think the last time you were here, we were just starting our demo, starting to tear things apart. That demo ended up taking quite a while. When you have a tile deck with cement board and plywood and joists, it's a lot of stuff to take down. These decks are really high. It's a challenge vertically to get to and work on those areas. It had to be done systematically. So when I bid out this project, I didn't realize how much time it was going to take just to tear the decks apart. We've only got half of them done. My budget's already blown for the demo. So any contractors out there watching these videos, when you have a tile deck and you got to take it apart or remove it, quadruple your price. Since then, we've gotten all the material down, cut all the old posts off, got rid of the old columns. Everything's gone. We've completely stripped the upper deck except for the joists that are cantilevering out of the house. We're going to repurpose those. And then I've dug the footing holes. I've had a footing inspection done, which passed. And then I poured concrete and put the concrete to elevation. Landscapers are going to be coming in here and tearing out all this concrete and taking out some of this lawn and creating a nice paver patio underneath our deck. They couldn't have the concrete any taller than where it's at right now. So I shot that with a laser to make sure that those footings were at the right elevation, that I didn't put too much. I actually had to take a little bit of concrete out of this hole here because I was a little too tall. So now we're good to go because the pavers will sit a little bit above our post level, but the gravel and sand and all that stuff will actually be at a lower elevation. That's done. And today we've been moving supplies down. We have almost all of our joists down here. Not only is it a tall deck, it's a long carry to the site. Now that that's done, we'll grade our framing. And then once the framing is graded, we will pick the thinnest joists and we'll start putting ledger boards up on the house. So that's where we're at today. If we get any further than that, we may end up, once we get the ledgers on the house, we can justify elevation, and then we can figure out how tall we need our posts. We can cut the post down and get the posts installed in the brackets. From there, we'll start putting up the beam. Last time you were here, we were bringing down all the supplies to the yard, but we haven't actually built anything yet. So since then, we've been able to get our posts mounted, get our beams in place, get all the joists up, and now we've cut the curve of the outside of the deck that we have designed, and we're starting to put up the outside rim joists, which we're using AZEK for, to give it a nice, smooth, subtle curve. We're also adding some mid-span pressure blocking that's gonna go underneath our waterproof bladder. That's gonna help keep the joists from moving around so much while we're building. And when we're walking around laying our decking, it's gonna keep the joists from moving out of whack. It also helps a little bit with deflection, but because we're only using a 2x4, it's not gonna help a ton, but that's okay. It'll just help keep things nice and tight. So why don't you follow along and see if we can get the rest of this curve up today, and we'll start some surface blocking, and I'll explain to you how that goes. And we'll also show you some of the flat blocking we've put in already for our double surface borders. And then we also have to add some blocking for our Regal Ideas crystal rail. So we have the curve built out on the outside of our deck. So everything's locked together. All the outside joists are pinned to the outside rim joist. We have 2 layers of decking going around and meeting in the middle. So they're about 16-foot span. Everything's cut and sanded and looking good. So our next step is we have to run some solid blocking on the outside of the deck. And the reason we're doing that is because we have a double surface border coming in that's going to be curved. And we also need room for our blocking. So what we'll do is we'll put a flat block in. That'll catch the double surface border and the field decking when we cut it and pin it down. And then after that, we have to add some more blocking for our Regal Ideas crystal rail, which will be going in every so often. So I'll have to do a complete layout for that. So that's what's up next. We're gonna get started. We're gonna move our scaffolding around and we'll get the blocking ready to go. And I'll start cutting them in, and then I'll have my assistant start screwing it all together. There. Okay, now you're in. Alright guys, hey YouTube, drdecks here. Studio Man is unavailable today, so I am doing your weekly update. So since we talked to you last, we have gotten our waterproof bladder installed. We finished up our framing. I don't know if we had the mid-span pressure blocking in or over the beam blocking or any of our flat blocking installed, but that's all done. We have our bladder system in as well. So this keeps the deck completely waterproof. There's also the baffles over here. So those baffles catch the rainwater and they'll drop them into a gutter, which will be installed along this beam. So that'll go along the beam, and then we're gonna run a downspout over to catch this downspout so it catches into the drainage so we're not draining over the drain field. Okay, so that all looks really good. Now we're gonna go upstairs and we'll show you the top side and kind of show you what we've been doing besides this deck. So a lot of moving of materials and things. Oh, 3 points of contact, guys, when you're climbing ladders, okay? Always 3 points of contact. Once we got that completely done, we have put up a bunch of plywood all up here to safely work on this deck. This is 12 feet up from the ground, and that's another 11 feet above there. So we got all this plywood and we've screwed it all together so it's fairly safe to walk on. And then we started cleaning up the side of the house because it was a mess. This used to be tile, so we took the lowest piece of siding off, cleaned up all the garbage, all this stuff, took these lights out. New ones are coming in. Have a little bit of water damage in this corner. Had to take out the LVL. All these joists coming out of the house are all LVLs, which is an engineered lumber, but they cut all these on a taper because this used to be a tile deck and they needed to put drainage on it. Well, the tile deck was failing. We're taking this off, this outside rim joist, and we're sistering new joists to here. And what we're gonna do is we're in the middle, we're gonna go out an extra 2 feet so that we can mimic this curve. So this curve is now, we didn't plan this. This came about as we were building and the clients were like, hey doctor, we absolutely love this curve. We love it so much, we want you to recreate it up here. And I'm like, sure, no problem, I got you. I got you. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with this 2 foot that's cantilevered out the house. These LVLs are stronger than traditional lumber. They're actually 1 3/4 inches by 12 inch or 11 1/4 at the house, and they're 10 1/2 down here, but we're gonna put in new 2x12s. We're gonna glue and screw them to the sides of each one of these joists here. And then we're gonna bring them out to create the same curve that we have down here. So we're gonna start at the house over here, and some of these LVLs will just get cut, but then eventually we're gonna be coming out a little bit more to bring back this curve and cut it back into there. So that'll be a fun week. So I'll get you guys back on that next week and show you what we did there. And then we're also gonna put in a new ledger, a new rim, not a new ledger, excuse me, a new outside rim joist. And we're gonna hang it low so that we have something to attach our gutter to, because we're gonna put a bladder on this deck as well. We have to, because we have to protect these LVLs. They cannot get wet. Cannot, okay? They're designed for interior, not exterior. I don't know, there's probably some builders out there could look at this and go, well, doctor, actually, these are exterior grade, but I don't think they are. I could be wrong. Don't quote me. Like I said, I don't build, we'll ask Awesome Framers. Maybe Awesome Framers will know. He might be swinging by the job site next week for a special guest appearance. We have some Stabila stuff going on, so if you're on Instagram, give us a follow, and you might win some really cool swagger next week. Little hint. So there's that. So we had a lot of staples to pull out of the bottom because there was softening, and they used staples, which I didn't understand, but okay. And then we had to pull all the nails out of the top of these because we're repurposing all those. This still has to come off. We'll do that next week. This still has to come off. We'll do that next week. And then we'll get the frame done. We'll get the outside rim joist on, and then we'll bladder this, and then it'll be ready for deck boards. So this deck's ready for decking, but obviously we're building on top of it, so there you go. I will leave you with a beautiful view of the Puget Sound and all those lucky people out there that are enjoying it on their boats. Hey YouTube, Dr. Decks here. Another week without Studio Man. So I'm here to give you a build update on what we're doing on our current deck building project. If you guys want to catch a daily update, you can go to our Instagram page as well, but we built out and glued and screwed these joists to the existing LVLs that were in the deck. They projected out 6 feet. We came out about 8'4" at the peak, and then slowly taper back to where we're cutting the LVLs away in this section here. So with the screws and the liquid nails and everything else, we used a Fasten Master headlock, a 2 7/8 inch headlock. I'm gonna climb up there and show you guys this stuff, but you can kind of see the headlocks right there, okay? So those coupled with the glue made a really nice extension so we could create the exact same curve from this deck up here, just back more, okay? So we got all that done. We got all of our surface blocking just about finished for that. Let's go up the ladder and check that out, and then I'll show you guys the other side of the deck as well. Remember, when you guys climb ladders, always have 3 points of contact when you're climbing a ladder, which means you gotta have 2 feet and 1 hand touching, or 2 hands and 1 foot touching the ladder at all times. That's really important for safety reasons, okay? So there's the frame. You can kind of see the surface blocking, and then we've also moved on to some blocking for the crystal rail, for Regal Ideas crystal rail. You can see right here and here. I have about half of that done, and I'll come in Monday and finish that up. The only kind of issue, oh, check it out. Got somebody surfing over here. Yeah, doing all right. This is the Puget Sound. Very beautiful place we live. Okay, the scaffold, I'm not really comfortable past this point at the edge of the deck. You're 24 feet from the top of this deck here to the ground, okay? So it's a little bit sketchy. So I'm trying to figure out a way to get out here and cut this over here, right? Because basically I'm hanging off of here. So I think what I'm gonna do is move the scaffolding flat up against the house and kind of pin 2 of the feet here so they can't fall off the deck. And then I can get up on these planks and kind of finish off my details on the corner. Okay, so that's that. So this deck is almost ready for its bladder. On this deck, we're going to run the bladder from the outside of the deck to the inside of the house and then drop into a gutter so the gutters can come over and tie in right here into this downspout that drains down and goes all the way to the bay. That's what happened over here. So I've been kind of working solo on that section for the last couple days because the guys have been over here on this other side doing the demo on this side of the house, and everything is having to be stripped. So we've had to strip all the posts, strip all the soffit, even up on the top, and we're stripping all the fascia, and then we're stripping all the tile off the decks, and we still have to strip the plywood and the joists. So that'll happen next week. And once we have that torn down, then we'll figure out how we're going to rebuild. We're gonna be coming out with a curve on the fronts of these 2 decks as well to match these. They're not gonna be exactly the same radius, but it's gonna be nice. Then we'll start laying decking down over here. We also got all the decking placed and staged for these 2 decks right around the corner over here. So all that's ready to go as well. Not a bad week, fairly productive. We're getting there. Again, really tall, so it's time consuming, but we're getting there. So if you have any questions, leave them below. Hey guys, Dr. Decks here. I just shot this video, this update video for you, but I forgot to put it in 4K, so here you go. Doing it over, but we're starting from the top now and we're going down. What you see is our upper deck. We have the waterproof bladder installed, and we'll go down and take a look at it from downstairs just so you can kind of see what's going on. On this particular bladder, we ran it from the outside towards the house. So they're gonna put the gutter on the house and the water's gonna drain back over this way and tie into this gutter right here on the side of the house. So it's already tied into the existing drainage system. So that's kind of cool. So all the surface borders are cut in. It's a single surface border on this deck, a single in the middle. It's 27 feet from end to end. So the decking can only be 20 feet. So we had to have a way to break the board. And that's what we decided to do, is just put a nice breaker board down the middle of this deck. Now the bottom deck has a double surface border, okay? And we'll go down and look at that in a minute. We're not quite buttoned up with it, but you can get the idea. So we really have kind of a single up here, double down there, and these curves are exactly the same. We're gonna have curved glass installed with Regal Ideas crystal rail on both levels. Well, all four decks that we're building on the back of the house, plus one on the front. So this deck is completely finished on the top side, except for against the house, where we gotta add some trim and some flashing. And the way we fasten this was we used the Fasten Master Cortex plugging system, okay? So you can kind of see them right there, but when you're 6 feet up, you really don't see them. So I think that's the best way to fasten down a deck. We use stainless steel top block screws, and then we use the Cortex plug. It's the best way to fasten the decking down, especially when you have a waterproof bladder. Okay, so let's go down this ladder and we'll check out this lower deck. Always have 3 points of contact when you're climbing a ladder. So here's the bladder. So the bladder is running, it's draining towards the house, and there's the baffles. So the water, it either drips out of the bladder and into the baffle, it hits the baffle, or it just drips. Either way is fine. There'll be a gutter along here that the gutter company is coming out next week to install, and then they'll tie it right over here into this existing downspout. Right there. So that's what's going on with that, and that's what it looks like. So we're gonna soffit this entire deck, so that's coming. Stay tuned for that. We'll make it happen. It's gonna be a minute because we still have so much more to do. But this deck down here, we've got it to a point. We started laying decking yesterday, and we have both sections down. Everything's cut. I like to cut the boards when it's cool. So right now the sun's out, the sun's hitting the deck, it's hot, things are expanding and contracting a little bit. So I don't like to cut boards when it's this warm. So everything was cut first thing this morning, and then I was able to cut in my curves over here, okay, and get the first section of the curved surface border in, which is the most difficult. And I know you're saying, hey doctor, this looks like a different color than the rest of the deck, but it's actually the same color. It's just the way the sun hits it and refracts the light, it just kind of gives it a different look, a different sheen. So it is actually the same color as the rest of the deck. So that's all locked down and looking good. We just have to finish the surface borders around the edges the next time we're here. And then we can start doing the outside fascia details and start getting the deck complete. And then it's gonna be some crystal rail. The curved glass will be going down here as well. It'll look really great. Looking forward to that. And then also over here, everything is completely stripped all the way up. And that's all getting rewrapped in dark hickory as well. So once we get the decks framed over there and laid, we'll probably wrap all the posts, wrap the beams, all that good stuff. So we still got a ways to go, but we're getting there. So I'm digging it. Hey guys. Dr. Decks here. You can kind of see our triple stack fascia. We're getting into some of the finer details of our deck build. So while I was climbing the ladder, I thought I'd at least show you that. The first two layers are Cortex, and then the bottom layer has some face screws in it. They're color matched, so they look pretty nice. Sorry about the sunlight there. Not a bad look. I really like it. So basically the two decks on this side of the house are done. Okay, 3 points of contact, guys. Whenever you're climbing a ladder, 3 points. So the deck's all laid, it's all Cortex. We have a kind of little cool pattern going on over here with our corners. Instead of doing a miter, I like to do overlapping joints and that kind of thing. We did some folded corners as well. Technically they're miters, but they're still joined. We heat up and then we bend the corner in, so there's no seam, so that can't come apart. So all of our curved surface borders are in. I made a mistake on this one board this week. Had to take it out, go make another one, just cut it too short. It happens sometimes. And then was able to get all the fascia details done on the upper deck as well. So the upper and lower, both the fascia details are all done. Everything's good. We just, only thing we have to do before we soffit is check for leaks. So we'll do that soon, but we still have the other side of the deck to do, and we're gonna get to that probably next week sometime. Well, probably pretty quick next week. The only other thing we have to do on these decks to make them complete besides railing and soffit is we need to trim into the house, and we have some AZEK for that, and we're gonna flash that and put AZEK in to keep the weather from, when the weather comes in, to keep it from damaging or getting inside of this area. The bladder goes up the wall up to the top of this, so this will be flashed, have some 1-inch AZEK, Paint Pro is what they call it, and then they can paint it to either match the house or the doors. That'll be that, and then we'll put a bead of, I'm not sure if I'm gonna use black through the roof or if we're gonna go ahead and use Lexel, but it'll be one of the two. Then all that's left here is our soffit. We're just waiting for the electricians to get here to finish up some little electrical. That's okay, we have time. So basically all I'm trying to do right now is get all of the surface of the deck done, all the fascia, the trim and all that, and then our curved glass will be here next week, and we should be able to get some crystal rail pods installed along here, and it'd be awesome to have the glass up, and so you guys could see that. So I don't know if that's gonna happen next week, but it might happen the week after, just kind of depends. We're having all the crystal rail pods custom color matched to this deck. There is your weekly build update. I think that's catching you up with everything. Hey YouTube, Dr. Decks here. Here is your weekly update. Last one before Studio Man's back in action, so we'll actually get back to our normal videos. So this week we focused on, we had to replace 3 of the posts on the middle section of the deck, which actually took us almost 2 full days to do. It was very methodical, very time consuming. The previous builder bought 10 footers, but it was 10 foot 4.5 to get to the beam. So they just stacked 3 2x6s in each section and said, okay, that's cool, we're good with that. Well, we weren't good with that. So we ended up putting up some heavy duty brackets up against the house over here. We got rid of these 2 posts because now we're hanging on the structure of the house. Then we repurposed those posts. So one of those is over here and I think one of them is right here. And then we have one more to replace up here still. So that's gonna go in. It took us a minute to get those installed. And then we put some ML24Z, Simpson Strong Tie ML24Z with their SDS screws to lock all that stuff together. Then we were able to finally finish cleaning up this side of the house. We got our ledger on. Because I know we don't need 2x12 joists here, but because of the large cantilever in the middle, and because the old deck had a slope, a taper, because it was a tile deck and it had natural drainage, we decided that we'd go ahead and use 2x12s to make up 2 inches of the thickness, and then we had to still add a 3/4 inch shim to the top of the beam, right? Okay, so then we got these joists around, we got them all hung, we got our corner pieces in, and then we were able to pressure block over the beam, and then we got our outside rim joist on as well, and that's all screwed in, and that's a piece of 5/4 by 12 AZEK. Then we still, on next week, we will put in all of our surface border blocking, our curved surface border blocking will all go in here, and then we have to put in our blocking for our Regal Ideas railing as well. So that'll go in as well. So that's what we got done this week. Hey guys, Dr. Decks here. Welcome to our current build. All right guys, so I'm here today to give you a build update on what we've been doing, what we're up to for the week. So let's get into it. All right, so since the last time we did a build update, we have completed all of the surface blocking on the lower deck back here. So that's where we're gonna attach our surface borders to and our field boards that are on the curve. We also added all the blocking we needed for our Regal Ideas crystal rail. So that's all done. And then we proceeded to move up a level and we installed all the joists on the upper deck. We attached them to the house with some Simpson Strong Tie LUS 210Z joist hangers. We have cut in the curve on the upper deck to match the curve on the lower deck. Added the 5/4 by 12 piece of AZEK to keep it all tightened together. And now we're installing all the surface blocks on that deck. And then we still are needing to add all of the support blocking for the crystal rail pods as well. That is where we're at right now. And I think by the end of the day, we'll probably have all that installed. We have a couple of edge blocking sections to do as well, so that we can not only provide for our surface borders on one side of the deck, but also for our crystal rail on the other side of the deck to keep everything nice and tight. So we'll get that buttoned up, and then we will start cutting out our waterproof bladders for both decks, and we'll start installing a waterproof bladder on the upper deck. We have a little bit of fascia boards to add before we do that as well. So that's probably gonna take us the rest of today, and that will be what we're gonna be doing now for the next few hours. All right, so now we're up a level. Just to kind of show you what we have going on, we have a surface border blocking that we've done on every joist bay, just so to hold our curved surface border. Since we've manipulated that deck board, it needs support, and this way I can put the fasteners anywhere I want. But not only does it do that, it's supporting the curved surface border, it also has a couple inches for us to catch our field boards with as well. So that's why we use a piece of 2x8 in between the joist bays. So as you can see down here, we have these locked in, and then every so often you'll see a marking right here, and that is for a Regal Ideas crystal rail pod. And so then we've had to put another set of blocks underneath there, and that is to hold the support for the rail pods as well. So we don't have to put those on every single joist bay, just where the crystal rail pods are gonna be. So that's what we've been doing. We got that all completed on this lower deck, and then we're doing that right now on the upper deck. We almost have all the flat blocking done, and then we're just adding all the support for the crystal rail pods. And then the only other thing we have to do is add some blocking for the sides of the deck, and then we can start on a waterproof bladder. right, guys, so now we're up in the cul-de-sac. So I don't know if I've explained this to you, but every time we need a tool, we got to grab something off the truck, I forgot my keys, whatever it is, it's a long haul, we call it a long carry. So all the supplies start up here in this cul-de-sac and have to be carried down the hill to the backyard. So it's not bad when you're doing a quick, like 1 or 2 week job, but we're on a 3-month to 3.5 month project. It can grind on you a little bit, but we're kind of used to it now, so it's not so bad. It's like, it's funny because the electricians that were here the other day, I was walking up to the top of the cul-de-sac with them and they're like, yeah. It is something to consider when you're building professionally, or if you have to haul all your supplies a long distance, you just might want to think about it. Not only are we hauling them a long distance, we're elevating everything as well. So sometimes you want to consider that when you're going to go build something, of how much effort it's going to be to actually put it together. So what we have up here is a waterproof bladder. This is an EPDM pond liner. If you've watched any of our videos, you've probably seen us use this product before. So what I'm doing now is I'm laying this out. I'm gonna start cutting some of these parts up and chalk lining and cutting them up. And then the guys are gonna come up here in a minute and finish that off. And then I'm gonna start installing some of the bladder parts and actually making some fascia pieces as well that we need to install before we can fully install the bladder. So that's what I'm up to right now. I'm gonna get over here, get some of my scissors on, my chalk line on, and start snapping some lines and cutting some stuff up. Hey guys, Dr. Decks here. Welcome to our channel. Thanks for coming. Today we're going to talk about what our progress was for this week and a build update. All right, so this week was a little hectic. I got a text message from my client on Monday evening asking me, hey, is there any way that we can remove this post on this upper deck? We had one taken down strictly for cosmetic reasons. We took it down while we were demoing the deck, and there was still one holding a splice of a glue lamp up on the beam. So I immediately called my engineer the next morning and decided to talk to him about it, because I didn't know if it was possible or not. Usually we don't take out a post where there's a glue lamp and there's a seam or a beam. Usually you can't do that. But because of the size of the glue lamp and the way that the math worked out, it would be able to carry the span, but we had to have special plates fabricated that were able to hold the beam together so it wouldn't drop or sag. So it basically acts like a solid beam. Now, normally this would take weeks to plan out and figure out and put together, but because I got lucky and everybody was on point with me on this and they knew I was kind of in a rush, I was able to get the engineering done in the morning, and by the afternoon, I had the engineer's calculations and a quick draft, a pencil sketch really, off to my metal fabricator, and he had the time to cut those parts out, bore all the holes to the engineer's specification, and then while they were doing that, I ran and grabbed all the bolts I needed. It took me about 8 hours of time to facilitate getting this put together, and then it took us about 4 hours to actually install the bolts, drill all the holes, because they're 5/8 inch galvanized machine bolts, and there's 16 of them that mount these two plates together that hold this beam up. So I wasn't sure if it was going to be possible. We actually had to check the house and make sure that the beam was pocketed into the house so that it had the bearing load capacity and the shear strength to hold up the end of the beam, and make sure that in that 5 foot run, it goes from the corner of the house 5 feet and then another 15 feet to the outside of the deck. So we had to make sure that when we bolt that all together, that it would hold properly. Okay. So once we had the plates here, all the bolts are here, and we had the 5/8 inch bolt holes ready to go. We had a couple of drills. The fabricator opened those holes up by about a 1/16, but we still trashed a couple 5/8 inch bits, because when you're drilling that many holes, you have to drill from both sides and try to meet in the middle. And I had an eave that hung down like this a little bit, so my drill on my side, I was drilling at a slight angle up, so we had to really clean out those holes to be able to get the bolts through. And then finally got all those through and got it all locked together. And before we tightened anything up, I had jacked the beams up a 1/4 inch higher, and then we bolted it all together, tightened all the bolts, and I pulled the jack down, and it still had a gap. And then when I cut the post in half, it pinched on the saw blade, so I know it came down just a little bit. But then once I pulled my saw out, we were able to move the top part of the post and pull it out, clean it up. So now we have a 20-foot free span over here on this upper deck to match this side of the deck as well, where there's no beam and there's no post coming down. Okay, so this one has a beam and one post, but the center of the deck's open. So they have this really beautiful view from their upstairs and no posts in the way. I think part of the reason there were so many posts on the deck is because the upper deck was gonna match the lower decks, so on and so forth. But now, since we've done all this work, they decided, you know what, it's gonna look a lot better without these posts. So we were able to complete that task in a little over 24 hours. I'm really proud of that. And I have engineered and stamped plans that say that the math says that that's okay and it's not gonna sag. So when you think about it, there's trusses that come through the top of the house over the top of a bearing wall, and they cantilever out 5 feet to the beam, and then there's probably another 16 inches past the beam. So there's an engineered truss. I've seen cantilevers that big without a beam before. So this beam's not holding up a ton of weight until there's like a snow load or something like that. I could show you the math. I don't have the paperwork with me right now. So that got completed on, I think, Tuesday and part of Wednesday. And then we finally got started on the waterproof bladders for both these levels. So those are just being finished up right now. And then we have some decking ready to go. So once we get the bladders done, we're gonna start pulling decking up on these 2 levels, get that up, and then we're gonna start installing deck boards on the lower level first, and then we'll get the upper level done after that. Okay, so we are doing all curved glass on all these decks. So the hard part about that is the curved glass takes several weeks to have made, and I have to make templates for each radius that we do for each deck. So 2 decks are 1 radius, these 2 decks over here are another radius, and then the front deck is a 3rd radius. So I've already got the glass here for the first 2 decks that we've built, and now I need to get the order in immediately for these 2 decks on the other side of the house, plus there's a 5th deck on the front of the house that we also have to figure out the radius for. I already have this radius figured out for these 2 decks. I've made the templates, I've got all the lengths, I've figured it out, I've written it down. They're 55.5 inches on a 21-foot radius. So these pieces of glass, they don't look like they curve very much, okay? But when you put them together 4 in a row, it's gonna turn into that curve over there. All right, so now the front deck is very small. It only has a 42-inch projection at the peak, and it's going all the way back into the house to 0, okay? What that means is that's a 7-foot radius, which I have laid out down here on the ground. And I need to figure out the glass aspect of this board. So I know that the glass mounts pretty much sit right in the middle of this curve board. The outside of this deck cannot be any further than this board. This is the one deck that I'm actually pre-making the planks before I build the deck. All the other decks I've already created the curves, and I have the curve boards here, but I'm not relying on those as much as I'm going to rely on this piece for the front of the house. Since I have to pre-order the glass because we're several weeks out, by the time I get that deck framed and laid and trimmed, I want the glass here so I can continue building. Before I can do the soffit, I have to have the glass here to complete it. So what I'm going to do is I have a piece of really thin plywood, and I can do a couple of different things. I can just trace this out and try to figure out my lengths. But if I actually have a template that I've made out of plywood like this, then I can, now this is not the right radius, so I'm just giving you an example. I can lay these down with the gaps I need and kind of figure out the sizes I need of the glass. So this is so important to do this today. I have to get this order in, that I'm going to stop what I'm doing and everything else is gonna wait. And I'm gonna go ahead and make the templates for this last deck and get these made and figured out for length, and then get these pieces ordered up today. So that's what's on my docket. The guys are finishing taping up all the spots on the deck and they're cleaning up and everything. And we're getting ready to start moving deck boards up onto these 2 decks. But I've got to get this done. This is like homework that I've been, I'm not gonna say I've been neglecting. I've just been so intensely busy and putting out fires and just doing all this stuff, other stuff for this project, that it's taken a back burner. But the back burner's boiling now, so I gotta cut the heat and get this done. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. So what I did was I used a circular saw with a tool called escape plate. So stay tuned, we're gonna do a review on that for you as well. And I cut these curved templates out. This is going to resemble my glass. These are actually a little thicker than what the glass is gonna be, but since it's such thin plywood, I had to do something that wouldn't flex too much while I'm laying it out on top of this template that I have over here. So this template is basically, I'm committed to making my deck that size. So that's my surface border for the template. So what I'm gonna do is take these pieces that I have on this 7-foot radius, and I'm going to figure out, I know I needed 3 pieces of glass. So these resemble the glass. And now I'm gonna cut them down to length so I can figure out my gaps, how much gap I need from the ends and from each piece of glass. And then I'll be able to figure out the lengths I need on these 3 pieces by identifying them on the board. So that's what I'm gonna do next, and then I can call in for my next glass order. All right, so I took a measurement from the outside of this board, and I said, okay, I'm just gonna divide my plywood pieces up into thirds and make them all the same length, just so I could start to figure out my layout. So just for all you new viewers or people that don't work in curves, what that did was I have to put my glass 2 3/4 away from the edge of this board. And when I did that, the length of this grew by over 6 inches. It's about 6 3/4 of an inch. When you're laying these things out, you need to know that I still have to put 2-inch gaps between that piece and this piece. Plus I want to have about a 2-inch gap from each side of the house. So I need to subtract from these 3 pieces, we'll call it 6.5 plus 2, 4, 6, 8 inches. So 14.5 inches from my current length. So 14.5 inches from my current length needs to come off of these pieces. So I'm gonna stack them back up and take that off and then lay these back out and see what I come up with. So now I have cut out my curves and I've got my spacing proper and it looks really good. So this is my final template for the glass. So now I'm gonna do a final measurement just to make sure that I didn't mess up the length. I have it written down on my tape. I'm gonna double check it. And then I'm gonna go ahead and put in my glass order. Hey guys, Dr. Decks here. Welcome to our weekly build update. All right, so since the last time I saw you guys, we have managed to install both decks on both levels. We had Monday off too as a holiday, so in 3 days. I think we had the decks cleaned off and ready to go, and then we got all the decking up there, and then we actually installed the decking over the last few days. We have the gutter company here today. They're getting the gutters in for the waterproof bladders, and all we have left to do on these 2 decks behind me is wrap our top layer of fascia, which I just made the corner pieces for. I'm gonna go up and get the final measurements on those, get those cut and installed, and then we'll get the longboards in, and then that's done. And then after that, we're probably gonna start installing some crystal rail pods on the main deck and maybe even on the upper deck as well. We have the curved glass here, we have the flat glass here, so that can be an exciting time as well. So stay tuned and see how we do. But that's pretty much what we've done. We'll get into showing you the progress here in a minute once we get up some ladders. All right, so let's go check that out. All right, so here's our top corner trim piece that we're putting in. I had to notch out a little bit for some bladder material that was sticking out. And then I went up, I cut them long so that I could go up and mark where I need them to be, because every time we do a layer of fascia, the lengths and widths change, and I'm trying to get all of the corner pieces to line up kind of nice. Like over here, you can kind of see the line, and I want them to be close. They don't have to be perfect. My previous set were too short, and they were like an inch off, and like if I'm within a 1/4 inch, that's great, but if I'm an inch off, then the lines are off, and then flow isn't right, and then my yin isn't with my yang, and all that stuff. So it's just better. It's a little extra to work. It's a secondary step. I had to climb all the way up, 24 feet up to mark it, come back down, cut it. I could have probably taken measurements, but I just wanted to be as precise as I could. So now that I have those measurements, I marked them in white. I'll get these cut now, and then I can go up, get these installed, and then we can start measuring out for our fascia boards. What I just did was I did a layout and I pre-drilled the holes to identify where they're gonna go. I always like to have nice, straight, clean lines. Even if we're cortexing something, it always looks better in the end if all the screws are in a straight line that's perpendicular to the board with your square. And then when you go to install it, pre-installing all your fasteners onto a board like this, when you're hanging it so high in the air, it just makes it go a lot quicker. I didn't put any screws on the very end of this board because this board is long, and I'm gonna cut it to fit because it's really hard. Even if I took a measurement on a curve, odds are it's not gonna fit. Most of the time it would end up being too short with that measurement, and then I have to start all over again. I just threw away $100. So instead of doing that, I cut this board about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch longer. I've actually cut boards a 1/2 inch longer, and they still were too short on a curve. And I'm just like, that's a head scratcher, right? That's a financial burden. So this way, I just make it to a certain point, and then I will slowly cut and sand it in so that it fits right on the money, and then I can lock it in. So that's what we're doing today, is we're kind of pre-assembling down here on the ground, and then we're taking this material up to where we need it, and we'll start installing it at one side on the corner so it fits nice and tight, and then we'll bring it around to the trim that I just made, and then we'll splice it there, cut it, sand it. It might take a few attempts because I always go a little less than I need, and then I can bring it closer. And as I get closer, I might even put a little bit of a bevel on that board so that when I bring the clamps in on it, it kind of tricks it to going in. So just a couple tips for those newbies out there, or people that don't do this very often, how to really get your flexible fascia if you're working with curves, how to get those to fit properly. Okay guys, so I cut this board about 1.5 inches long, at least an inch long. And by the time I got over here, I've got only 1/8 inch of play. It just goes to show you, man, it's better to cut things long when you're working with curves and then sand them back versus trying to cut this thing to the perfect length. It almost never works that way, and hence why I did what I did. So there's your lesson for today on lengths for curves. Yeah, he's got a point. Hey guys, Dr. Dex here. All right, so let's do a recap of what we got done this week and then what we're doing today. So last week we were at the shop staining and sealing all of our 1x6 clear vertical grain cedar. So now we're ready to start installing some of it. We actually got some installed on the upper ceiling of the house over there. And you can kind of see there's a couple sanding marks on it, but it's beautiful. It looks really, really nice. We focused on getting that upper left deck done. That far left deck has been the most dangerous deck to build. We had to have scaffolding 24 feet high. I actually added another 4-foot section to make it a little bit safer so we could access the deck a little bit easier. Yesterday, we finished that deck complete. All the caulking, all of the Regal Ideas glass, pods, all the trim work, all the cedar, everything's finished. Now we're going to go to the uppermost section on the right side. But what's nice about this side of the deck is the lower deck projects much further out than the upper deck. So we can stage stuff down here and then bring it up. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add some vertical grain cedar to the house, which is about 34, 36 feet up from the ground. And we're going to resurface the underside of the eave in matching cedar to give it a more luxurious, beautiful look. The house already has its own venting, so we're just gonna go right over the top of the existing tight knot cedar with this vertical clear cedar. And that's really what I'm focusing on today, is just getting another section of deck complete. And then I can start focusing on the underside of the upper decks, but it's still a level lower than we've been working. All the curved glass is coming in, it's beautiful. We've cleaned it, so when the client turns it on at night, it's just gonna be a really beautiful look. There's your update. We're going to get started. We're gonna climb up here and get going on this upper softening. Let's see where we end up today. On the money. How's it fit? Awesome. Cut. All right, guys, so now we have this softening all finished up. It's ready for trim. Client's gonna finish that up and paint it before he puts it up, so he doesn't have to try and paint it once it's installed. And we are moving everything downstairs a level, and we're gonna start working on the underside of this deck. And I'll get into that in a minute on some things we have to do before we even start putting up the soffit. We have some modifications to make, which is gonna be quite messy. So not really looking forward to that, but the show must go on. So the only thing left here is to get everything off this deck, blow it off, clean this last piece of glass, and then we're going to install it, get it plumb, and then put in the clips. And then I just have to sneak myself off this upper deck, and then this deck will also be finished, which I'm just really completely elated that that's done. Big stressor relief, and just ready to start getting down lower onto these other sections and kind of get some completion going on, which will be 50% done by this afternoon. So looking forward to that. So today is our weekly update video, and just wanted to go over with you what we've got accomplished this week and what we're gonna do today. And let's see if we can accomplish what I think we're gonna get done, and we'll go from there. So behind me I call this the left side of the house, because when you're looking at it from the yard, it's the left side of the house, and we have the right side of the house. You guys have been following us for 4 months almost on this job. We are so close to finishing this side of the deck. Basically what we're into, we got the soffitting done, not only on the upper side of the house, but on both decks. The soffitting's done, the trim's all done, the beams are all wrapped, the posts are all wrapped, and we're just down to doing the column tops and bases. You can see right over there, we've got one column cap on that one post, okay? So that's what we're doing today, is we're doing the column caps and bases, and we're just trying to get those all put together so that we can continue finishing up the glass. And then once all that's done, the scaffolding comes down, and then all that's left on the back of this house is to do the soffitting on the main deck and the beam wrap and the post wraps on there. And then we move to the front of the house. So I'm looking forward to just having this back side of the house finished up, being able to move on. So today, like I said, just trying to get these column caps and bases done. Once those are in, then I can move on to other things. So let's just get going into this and get these column caps and bases pre-made so that we can start installing them around those posts. All right, so right now what I'm doing is I'm taking this palm sander and I'm just knocking down all the edges that are kind of tight, rough, and just scaling things down a little bit to make it a little smoother. And then we're gonna paint this edge right here, and then I'll be able to start assembling these column caps. All right, just so if you've seen our other video about the rejuvenation of the battery, just the FYI, I have that little power stack battery. It's the only 1.7 amp hour one we have. I've sanded about 8 boards with it. It's still got 3 bars of power and it's running great. So that little trick worked for us. I tried it on another battery later in the week and we didn't have any success with, but so far so good. And I've noticed I've had an 8 amp hour battery on this sander and it was getting a little heavy. My wrists were getting sore. I said, man, this is too heavy. I want to do something lighter. So I put our smallest battery we have on, and it actually had more power with this little power stack battery than it did with that 8 amp hour, which I was kind of surprised that it was kicking out that much more juice. So we'll see how long it lasts. But just wanted to give you guys an update on that. So I'm going to keep rocking with it. Hey guys, Dr. Decks here. Welcome to our channel. Thanks for coming. This week it was all about soffitting and lots of it. So behind me is the main attraction of this build. So we're just nearly done with the back of the house. I'm really excited. So this week what we did was mostly soffitting on the main deck. And we got that all cut in. And there was some trickery going on, trying to make the lines straight. If you want to learn a little bit more about that, you can always go to my Instagram social media page and follow some of the videos there as well. If you don't get what you need here, usually you can find it over there. We basically have buttoned that up, and now we're down to the final trim pieces of the beam wrap and the posts. So basically, we're just trying to make this beam and posts look like these beam and posts over here. And you can see there's a double stack wrap on the beam, and then the bottom of the beam is also wrapped, and then each post is wrapped, and then there's a column base and a column cap that trim out each post. Lucky for me, I already built all the column caps and bases, so when I was cutting all of those over there, I made the ones for over here. We already have all the wraps for the posts cut to length. We just have to assemble those. So that stuff's gonna go pretty quickly. Right now we're in kind of the painstaking part of assembly on the beam because there's hardware in the way, so we have to take a router and notch out some stuff and make sure that it fits properly as we're building. So that's what we're doing right now. We pretty much almost have the beam on the inside done, and the underside's almost complete. So once we get that finished off, then all we have to do is come out and do the backside, put a couple end caps on it, and then we can wrap the posts. So I'm not sure where we're gonna get with all that today, but our goal is to kind of get that buttoned up, start getting our tools cleaned up and all that and transferred up front, so that tomorrow we can start on building and doing the demo on that little front deck that we're gonna be doing. And also some more softening on the inside entry to the house. Sometimes when you're doing these projects and the client really likes your work, they might ask you, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? And on this particular deck, we did quite a bit of that and enhanced it, made it nicer, made it more artistic. So let's get going. So whenever I make trim or do parts, I try to be as equal as I can as far as my layout for fasteners. So I'm always pre-laying out where I'm putting my screws. Now these screws are going to be concealed with our Cortex hidden plugging system. I still like to have everything kind of placed where I want it and laid out real nice. And on this one, you'll see I routed out the bottom because there's a positive post to beam connection with some heavy duty fasteners, some structural legs in the way. So I had to kind of route this out so that when I put this piece in, that this will clear it and fit properly. And then I had to make sure I laid out the screws right so that they weren't intersecting in that metal plate as well. Because believe me, I've done it all. I've done it all. I've made the mistakes. I've laid it out this way. So usually I do the layouts and the trim. So I'll do the layout and then I'll have somebody come over and help me install. But on this little piece, it'll just be myself. So let's go install this over on the far end of the deck. All right, so I have my trim piece. You can see underneath the beam has to be trimmed out first. This is the last piece. You can see that notch I was telling you about earlier right here. It's to eliminate this problem right here. If I just try to put my board in without notching this, this is going to become a huge problem. So I have this cut on this angle that I need, and these boards are just the right width. So if I get them too far one way or another, they're not really going to fit too well. So I got to make sure that I have them spaced properly. That looks pretty darn good. I'm going to go ahead and knock that in, and then we'll Cortex that last. Okay, so that's done. Now I can finish putting up my fascia over here. All right, so up here we have another metal bracket that's in our way, and there's a couple screws that are poking out. If I don't identify those and bore out the back side of this trim, then this board's gonna stick out too far and it won't work right. So we gotta set it up here, hit it with the mallet, identify where these are, then take the board down, drill it out, and then I can finish my layout on this board. So it's a little bit of extra work, but then it goes together so nice. So we'll put this where we want it, and then I'll use the soft side. There's two different sides to this mallet, two different compounds. The yellow side is harder, the red side is softer, so I'll use the red side to tap on this, so I'm not marring up my material. Okay, now you'll see on the back side where those two marks have been made. Now I can identify those, and I'll take a 1/2-inch drill bit, and I'll bore those out without drilling through this 1/2-inch fascia, and then it'll sit nice and flat. All right, so here's my 1/2-inch drill bit. I'm just gonna put it over the tops of these two marks, and you gotta be careful, because if you go too deep, you'll drill through, and that's bad. You'd have to start all over again with a new piece. But you gotta make sure that you're at least a 1/4 inch deep to maybe 3/8 till you clear the head of that screw. Now that that's done, I can do my layout. Knowing that there's a bracket back here, I know that I gotta pull about 3 inches back from this side. So when I do my layouts for my fin fascia, I'm gonna try to lay this out about 12 inches on center. And we haven't gotten into a lot of layout videos. So if you guys like this video and you wanna learn more about how I do my layouts, as you can see on my square, I've taken a Sharpie and I've marked the two lines where I wanna be when I put my screws into this thin trim. These, I can erase this with an alcohol wipe or some thinner, but it really helps me stay on point because it's so easy to mismark. It is so easy to mismark a board, and either you got to Cortex that or you throw it away and start with another one. So to avoid that, I like to make sure my marks are on point. So even as a professional, I'm always trying to figure out ways to, one, speed things up, and two, make it so that I don't screw up. It's always good when you don't screw up. Okay, so I've got that side marked. I've identified where everything is. I wanna make sure I'm clearing that bracket. And then over here, now the fascia boards I'm using for the lower section of the trim, they only come 12 feet long. Our beam is over 12 feet long. So I'm gonna have a 12-foot piece and like a 3-foot piece. It's about a 15-foot run. So I'm gonna have a butt joint right here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure 1 inch back from the edge of the board, and I'm gonna go ahead and pre-drill a couple little screw lines. Okay, now I'm gonna figure out my spacing. Now for this thin fascia, this is AZEK Dark Hickory. It's their fascia board. They come 11.5 inches wide by 12 feet long, and they're only a 1/2 inch thick. So we use color matching screws. There's some guys that'll Cortex this, but I think it's risky. I won't do it. I think in our environment, the fascia boards are gonna pop. It is a cleaner look, but I think I'd rather have a nice stainless steel color match screw that will hold this for eternity. Now we have to put these screws every 12 inches or less. So that now I'm gonna see how far these two end screw holes are apart. And then I will determine what my centers are gonna be, and we'll show you how to do that. We're about 140 inches, which here's 144. So that's 12 feet. So to be 12 foot on center, we're 4 inches long. So that means we'd have to come back 4 inches in the average. So if we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 spaces. Let's do a quick calculation here. 140 inches divided by 12 spaces is 11 and 11/16 would be my layout. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab our square. We're gonna go 11 and 11/16 for our first mark, and then we're gonna hit plus, and then we're gonna hit equals. And every time we hit equals, it's gonna add 11 and 11/16 to our measurement. So I've got my first one laid out. I'm gonna go ahead and mark it. Now I'm gonna hit equals, and it's gonna go to 23 and 5/16. And then I'm gonna hit equals, and it goes to 35 inches. That's an easy one to mark. And then so on and so forth until we get to the end of our run, 46 and 11. And this way I have nice equal runs, and all my screws are spaced out equally as well. So any particular people that might look up at my workmanship will say, hey, all right. Believe it or not, it's really easy to mess this up. That's why sometimes I'll put electrical tape on my square if I don't have a Sharpie or it's not marking out right or something like that. Okay, and usually before I mark my very last mark, which would be 128 and 5/16, I'll put the square there, but then I'll also check it with my tape measure just to make sure that I'm close. So from this set of holes to the square, I have 11 and 5/8, and from the square to my last set of holes, I have 11 and 7/8. So I'm at, about an 1/8 inch off. So if I go to 11 and 3/4, this should be about 11 and 3/4, and that's where I'm gonna make my last two marks. There. Now, if anybody picks up on that 1/16 of an inch off, you're hired from 12 feet down. If you can look up and say, hey, those two screws are a 1/16 inch the wrong way, well, they won't be because they're actually equally spaced, but I don't know if anybody else is gonna be able to tell. Probably not. You'll notice over here I have two different sets of screws. One set of screws is stainless steel, just multiple colors, whatever, for Cortexing the big boards. But when we're doing the thin boards, we have another set of screws that we have faced. Now these are color matched screws. They're made by Fascia. They're branded under AZEK. They're called top lock screws. This is the dark gray color, and you see the heads all have been painted. I'm not sure if they're painted or powder coated or baked on enamel or whatever. And then the rest of the screw is stainless. And when you put it down, it has a similar color tone. It's not perfect, but it's close enough that when it's installed, it looks really nice. So we're gonna pre-thread all those color match screws into this board I just laid out. So all we gotta do when we go up to the deck is just put it in. So I'm just gonna take a T20 and I'm just gonna pre-thread these. Now that those are installed, I will take this with my assistant and we'll go up and we'll fit it real quick, and then we'll start installing the screws, and then I'll start measuring for the next piece. All right, so I don't know if you guys can see it that great, but we have a gap here in the bottom of our fascia board, and that's because the bottom of these two boards might be tilting in a little bit. So the way for me to fix this is to shim behind this screw and push this board out Looks like I need a little bit more than that. So I'm gonna start breaking this off until I get what I need. That looks pretty good right there. Because this post is getting wrapped and then it's getting a column cap, it'll hide this shim. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a screw in here. So now that that's done, I don't know if I can snap this. Once we get this wrapped, you won't see that. There we go. And that'll be that. So the inside of the trim is now done. We just gotta go do the same thing on the outside, and then we can start wrapping these posts. Hey guys, drdecks here. So we are finished with the back of the house. We have shifted gears. We've transferred all of our tools to the front, and now we're building this over here, which is a little Juliet deck that was in ill shape. It had 2 layers of tile for some reason and multiple thicknesses of goop and cement board and plywood. All that came off. We ended up sistering the joists and extending this little deck out about 12 to 14 inches, depending on the curve. It was a square little deck, and now we've turned it into a nice curved deck to match all the back decks. We have curved glass, the whole 9 yards. We're doing everything just the same. We're even waterproofing this little guy because there was some water intrusion into the wall and some big problems had happened, some dry rot. We've taken care of 98% of that. There's a couple spots that we really couldn't repair, but we didn't want to dig in so deep, try to get behind the stucco. It would have been a nightmare. So everything's good. And now we've gotten to the point where we've added the joist lengths. We put in our curve. We put a TimberTech Paint Pro 5/4 by 12 rim, outside rim joist on. And we've added all of our solid blocking for our Regal Ideas crystal rail. We've added little plywood sections on the ends because I had to. There was no other way to frame it because we extended the deck a couple feet on each end as well. We've mounted some plates to the wall. So everything's nice and tight. All of our surface blocking is in for our field boards and for our curved surface border. So now it's time to add an exterior trim piece, which is gonna be for finish. Once that's done, then we can add our bladder and waterproof this little deck. So that's what the rest of this day is gonna be, is kind of getting that taken care of. Once the bladder's done, we'll tape it all up, and then we will be ready for decking. Let's get back to it and see what we can accomplish. Got it? Okay, so we have our outside trim piece on. Our waterproof bladder is gonna go to the outside of that first trim board, so that's why that had to go up. We'll Cortex that. Had a couple issues getting it in the corner, but it's installed now. And now we have a little bit of metal that's left over from the stucco that we have to clear. So we're using some carbide tipped oscillator blades to try and cut through the metal to get it out of the way so our decking will slip in to the area that we need when we first start laying our deck boards. So before we do the bladder, we need to cut that out of the way because our bladder is gonna come up the wall, and that can't be hanging down or else our decking's not gonna fit. And then we gotta try to scribe the first deck board to go in there, and that's gonna be a challenge. So I'd much rather cut away the wall and then go ahead and do our waterproofing, and then we'll be able to install our decking pretty quick. now we have, the frame has been done, our fascia's on, we installed the same bladder system on this deck that we did on all 4 decks in the backyard. So we got that figured out. Now what we're doing is we're securing basically some flashing, but we're using the EPDM as our flashing up against the house. And what I'm doing is I'm doing a 12-inch piece, so the water has to hit this, and then it's gonna guide it back out 12 inches away from the house and drop it back into these joist bays, so the water can then go down into a contained gutter that's gonna be underneath this deck. So let's just say we're putting our first deck board. What I'm doing, I have enough space that I'm going to tuck the deck board in here, and I'm gonna run my bladder all the way around the outside of the decking, and then I'm gonna cut my bladder up here, and then I'm gonna run a bead of really good sealant from the door up against the deck board. And that's what's gonna keep it from leaking. Even if the water gets to here and it goes this way, it's still gonna catch inside of the bladder and end up being contained and not leaking into the wall like it has been for the last, I don't know how many years. Now over here, we have a similar situation. We really have to rely on sealant because we don't have any flashing coming through this stucco wall. We only have about 2 feet of wall to worry about. If I was doing 30 feet, I might cut the wall, put in flashing, and put in trim and all that stuff. But because there's only 2 feet on each side, what I'm gonna do is I'm still gonna install the deck board. I'm gonna curl this EPDM pond liner like flashing, and then I'm gonna run it up the wall, and I'm gonna actually seal it to the wall, and then I'm gonna put a piece of trim on the wall, and then I'm gonna seal that as well. There's already 2 layers of protection underneath this system, but in case any water gets behind here, it will also have to be caught and contained. There's a very low chance that this deck is gonna leak. I have 4 different layers of protection. This last deck that was installed with the tile didn't have any. I don't know if you guys saw this or if you've seen some of our previous videos on the back decks, but this particular deck had 2 layers of tile, not just 1, and we don't know why. I think they were just trying to build it up to the threshold, and they just added an extra layer of tile and glued it up, and there was like a 1/2 inch of thin set mortar or whatever in between there. It didn't work out too well. So now what we're gonna do is I'll trim the bladder system up against here, and then we'll put a nice bead of sealant all around here. There's still like a rubber gasket right here. If the water gets behind the sealant, there's still a rubber gasket, and then potentially it could leak. But we think we're gonna resolve all the issues that this home has had in the past because of what we're doing now. And then over here, the old deck stopped right here, and then that's where the wall continues out a little bit, so it's a little bit of a jog. And then we're gonna run that piece of trim, it's like baseboard in a house, and we're gonna Cortex that to the wall. And then once it's Cortexed, then we'll run a bead of clear right up against the wall and the piece of trim. We still have quite a ways to go here, but we at least got the membrane done today. And then we will start laying the decking next, and then we'll install our crystal rail. And we have some really cool curved glass for the face of this deck. It matches exactly the back, except this is a much tighter radius. We have a 17-foot radius and a 21-foot radius on the back, but this is a 7-foot radius on this deck here. Hey guys, Dr. Decks here. Welcome to our channel. Thanks for coming. We are finished with our current deck build. I just wanted to go over the entire thing, the entire process, in case you might have missed an episode or 2. The first thing we had to do was actually get a building permit, which took us about 6 months. There was a lot of speculation and issues with the building department because we're located on High Bank waterfront. There was tribal portions of the permit that had to be checked out to make sure that the tribal community didn't have any issues. Even though we're 200 feet back off the shoreline or 150 feet back, it was still quite a process to get us to this point. So once we achieved our permit, we had to break ground. So we dug our footings. Now one deck, there's actually 4 decks on the back of this house, and there's 1 on the front. Now the 4 decks on the back of the house were existing tile. They were kind of waterproof, they were failing. So they're starting to leak and starting to drip, and the clients were very unhappy. They're extremely hot in the summertime. We have western exposure, so the sun hits these decks and it becomes 180 degrees. You can't walk on them barefoot, like 150 to 180 degrees on this tile. Very hot, very uncomfortable, and just unbelievably difficult to use when they're that warm. So the bottom deck, the main deck that I'm standing in front of right now, the clients wanted that one enlarged. And that's where we started with this project was designing this deck here to be enlarged. So we went ahead and we threw our DRDecks style into it. We added a curve, and I was probably one of the only people in the area that proposed, hey, we can build you a curved deck, but what are we gonna do to secure it as far as railings? How are we gonna make it safe, but beautiful? So I showed them some curved glass options, and they really liked that idea. So we started building this deck. We dug the holes to the specified engineered depth, width, had those inspected, and then I poured concrete, put some carbon fiber rebar in those 3 footings. So we only had to pour 3 footings for this entire deck. The rest of the decks are more like remodels, and the main deck was new construction. So we completely tore this deck down and started over. We dug the footings, we put in some Simpson concrete cement brackets, and we built up from there. That all had to be stringed out and carefully placed. Once those were cured, then we came up from there off of those brackets with 6x6 posts. Over here, we had to use laminated engineered glue lams, engineered beams. We had a 13-foot span between our center post and the outside post on each side. Since the deck was curved, I put the beam on an angle, so as the joist came out, we didn't have too much of a cantilever. If I would have left the beam straight like this, we would have had a massive cantilever, which probably wouldn't have passed engineering in the center. So by bringing the beam out like this, I was able to keep my cantilever short and still make 2x12 joists work. I think we're about 14 inches on center on this particular deck, so that we were able to make the engineering work for the inside of the deck and the cantilever of the deck. And that's why this beam is not straight. It's actually on a V like this, okay? So once the deck was framed, then we installed a waterproof bladder on top of that. Because we did all these curves, we heat bent the surface borders to match that curve on top of the decks, and it looks really nice. Once the decks were waterproofed, then we installed TimberTech AZEK dark hickory decking on each level. So once the homeowners came home, we finished framing the curve out of this main deck on a Friday. The rest of the decks were just supposed to remain straight. And the client came to me and said, we like this curved deck so much. Can you replicate that above us on our upper deck? And I'm like, well, I'd have to add some extra framing to your existing. Now the upper deck, all the joists cantilevered out the house. Whoever framed it originally put a bevel on the tops of all the joists to create the drainage it needed for the tile to drain. But it wasn't very much drainage, and that's why a lot of the tile failed, because the water was just sitting up there and getting through the grout and all that stuff. We ended up sistering new joists to all of the existing floor framing, which were LVLs. So they're extremely strong. They're already sticking out 6 feet, and they were 16 inches on center. So by adding an extra 1.5 inches, it put us closer to 14 inches on center. But then we brought them back into level, and then we glued and screwed those. And then I created an extra 2 feet in the center of that upper deck so I could create the matching curve to match this deck. I had to figure all this out to let the client know if it was actually possible or not. And it was. So we ended up shaving back the edges of the deck and then pushing out the center just so we could create the curve. So the upper deck does not have any beams or posts. It is waterproof as well. Same materials and curved glass with the Regal Ideas crystal rail and coastal curved glass installed. Once the decking was installed, we installed all the Regal Ideas crystal rail glass mounts. We had to lay those out very carefully, because when you order curved glass, you only want to order it once, but you have to order it in advance, or else it takes 4 to 6 weeks to get it, and then you're just sitting around twiddling your thumbs like this, which is bad. So once we got these 2 decks done, all the fascia went on. It's a triple stack, triple layered fascia. So there's a main piece of multi-width that's actually integrated into the first piece of fascia, which actually is integrated into the bladder. The bladder actually goes over the top of that and keeps the decks waterproof so they don't leak in between the fascia boards and the ledger board. Then we added a lower section of half-by material for the lower section of the fascia, and then the upper section of the fascia, we wrapped the top of the deck boards. Like, here's your decking right here. And then we always put our fascia, our top piece like this. So the top two pieces are actually the 1x material, which we were able to Cortex. And then the third one, I call it a triple stack. The third piece of fascia, we actually face screwed with color matching screws. Some people actually Cortex the fascia as well, but TimberTech doesn't recommend it. They won't warranty it. And it does look nice to have it all completely Cortex, but you're only holding that fascia on by about 1/8 of an inch, and it's just not enough. I think things move around too much around here for that to work. So we don't do that. We actually use color matching stainless steel screws. And I think the finished look is really nice. So now that the fascia is all done, we've got our glass all mounted. It's all level and plumbed and ready to go. So after that was finished, we still had the undersides of the decks to do. So each layer of each deck has clear vertical grain cedar that costs more than the decking did, and you don't get as much coverage. So it's kind of a spendy part of the project. This is what the client wanted. This is what he's had in the past, and that's what he was determined to have. So we wanted to make sure that became a reality. We pre-stained all of those boards at my shop, both sides, before we brought them out. So that was a little bit of a logistics thing, but we got it handled. We got everything out here. We got all that installed. And then we put a nice little piece of dark hickory trim around all the curves to make that work. And just really pops nice with the rest of the project. So everything on this deck is dark hickory. There's no two-tone to it. It's all the same color. And I actually do like that look. It's a very nice look. And those Cortex hidden fasteners really hide the fasteners extremely well. Then we also use varying gauges of finish nails to nail up a lot of our trim. We're using an 18 gauge nail for all the small detail trim, all the curved trim on the underside of the fascia. And then some of our wall trims, we're using a 15 gauge stainless steel nail running through our DeWalt guns. So over here on the other side of the house, we have two exact matching cloned decks, I'll call them. And the client also came back to me. Originally, they just stuck out 6 inches past the beams, and we ripped all of the trim off all the posts. We left the beams in place. We took all the joists out, and then we reframed the decks, and we leveled them up because they had pretty severe drainage because of the tile decks that were on there before. We packed out the beams an inch and raised those up a little bit. And then we added 2 inches we went from a 2x10 to a 2x12 for our joists. So we actually packed the height 3 inches. So there was a 3-inch drain on these decks over here, which was quite a bit, and you could really see it, and it was awful. So by adding 2 inches to the thickness of the frame, plus an inch packing on the top of the beam, we were able to level those out. And then I told the client, it's like, hey man, we could probably curve these decks. They're not gonna be the same radius as over here, but we can probably add a curve to these. And he was like, please, let's do it, because they're so small and they feel so tight. So we went ahead and we added 2 feet to the center of these decks over here. So this side of the house is a 17-foot radius. This side of the house is a 21-foot radius, but they are pretty close, and there's not a whole lot that you can tell the difference between those two radiuses. I personally really like the detail that we did on the posts and the beam wraps. And if you notice the top deck, we were able to remove the posts that were holding up the middle of the beam because it was a laminated beam, an engineered beam. And we actually had a special bracket made to get rid of one of the posts on that upper deck. So there's a clean view coming out the door, looking out the window. There's no more posts on the upper deck. We couldn't do it on the lower deck unless we wanted to start replacing the beams to take out more posts. So we skipped on that, but we were able to do it on the upper deck. So we went ahead and did it. What's unique about each deck is the client had electricians come in and they wired up each deck on a wall switch with a 24-volt transformer with a dimmer so that they can turn on 1 to 4 decks all at the same time with different switches, and they can adjust the intensity of the glow that the glass has depending on how bright or how little light they want coming from the railing. They said they can turn it down to the point where just the edges glow, or they can turn it all the way up so the glass glows a nice, beautiful blue. Once all the softening's done, We had gutters added so that those gutters drain off and right into existing downspouts. The main deck actually drains a different direction, and it's gonna be tied into existing ground drainage, but everything has a place where the water gets taken out and diverted so it's not all just pooling up in the yard. And then the final touch was the client added some really beautiful lighting to the backside of the deck and a really nice look. Hand selected all those and the bulbs that went into it. Those are all wired up and installed as well. So now that this is kind of the explanation, let's go up to the front deck and we'll explain that one as well. All right, guys, and here we are on the front of the house. There was a little Juliet balcony deck that was part of the house. It was there when the client bought the house. It was just a 2-foot by 6-foot deck. Didn't have much purpose except it was just kind of a look that I think they were going for this Mediterranean look, and that was something you see a lot overseas. So that was part of this house. Clients weren't really happy with it. It was kind of an old style wrought iron railing that was kind of rusting and falling apart. So we took that down. We removed all the tile. There's actually 2 layers of tile. I've never seen this before. 2 layers of tile, cement board, plywood, and then 2x10 joists that kicked back into the house, quite deep. I never did really figure out how far back they went. I know it was over 12 feet. These 2x10s are sistered to some I-joists, okay? So what we did was we tore all that apart, we tore all the wall blocks out, and then we sistered 2x12 joists to the 2x10s, we glued them, and then I screwed back as far as I could reach and got additional fasteners beyond the pivot point of the cantilever of the house. And then I brought the center of this deck out an additional 16 inches. Now I got a lot of backlash on this on the internet. I'll be honest with you. After it was framed, I got up there and I jumped up and down on this deck. And I actually experienced no deflection at all on that deck, which usually on every deck, we have a little bit of deflection. Deflection is having a little bit of bounce or a little bit of the wood wanting to give as you jump up and down or give it weight. I was so impressed with how strong this little deck ended up being. I'm completely confident it's never gonna fail. You could pack that thing shoulder to shoulder, put 10 people out here, and it will not fail. So we basically built it up the same way after we framed it. We used a piece of 5/4 by 12 AZEK trim, Paint Pro, as the curved rim joist. And then we were able to frame in and build around that and attach all our fascia pieces to it and that, so on and so forth. We also did the exact same rail system, which is the Regal Ideas crystal rail. We had all the pods custom powder coated. Again, it's an expense and it's time consuming because you have to mess around with all the set screws and make sure everything fits properly and that it'll still work like it was designed to. So after that, we finished it off by putting the same exact matching cedar underneath. Now on the actual piece of trim that we did, the trim for around the cedar, we tried to cold bend that. This is a 7-foot radius, much tighter than anything out back. And we broke that trim trying to bend it. So we actually had to fire up our heating blankets and heat up the trim and then mold it to the curve. And so we would be able to get it to install properly up against that tight curve. So that's done. Everything's done except for the gutter on this front side of the house. We just have to call the gutter company, which I have. Basically, that one's done. Same tricks on the light switch. It's on a wall switch with a dimmer, so he can turn this on and let it glow bright or very dim or not at all. So just kind of a cool way to add that extra pizzazz onto your deck. So that's about it, guys. That's all we have for you. We're basically cleaning up and we're gonna be taking a small break. I think we'll still be putting out some videos for you, but just gonna take a couple weeks to reflect and go attend a couple trade shows. So if you're out and about and you see us, come say hi. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell icon to be notified when we're putting out new content. Don't forget to comment on this video. Let me know what you thought of these residential decks. In my opinion, they're more like commercial hotel luxury resorts. And I'll see you guys on the next build. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.